It's like the gamble they're taking with that. It just blows my mind.
I think that hard drug addiction is a different thing.
Yeah.
I really think it's a different thing. I haven't experienced it, but I have friends that have, and they get scared like they got captured by a demon. And when they get clean, they don't want to fuck around with nothing.
Yeah.
They're like, dude, you don't understand. I got captured by a demon. And it's kind of, if you wonder, like when people talk about like demonic possession, like that was always a thing back in the day.
Yeah.
Before, you know, people really had an understanding of human psychology and myths and lores and what people are terrified of. Like demonic possession was a real thing. But if you think about what happens to someone when they get really hooked on meth, I mean, how much different is that than being captured by a demon? You're captured by a chemical demon that's ruining your life, wants you to get in a fist fight with cops, wants you to drive with no fucking tires, wild shit.
Yeah. It's
a chemical demon.
It does possess you. I mean, like, look, when people were doing the PCP thing back in the day, right? You know, back in Southgate when Sen and I were like, you know, younger, before we were, you know, while we were in demo stages, right, doing our demos and stuff like that, we'd, you know, trek around the city, you know, like go to parties and stuff like that, house parties, if you will. And every now and then, you know, because we were broke ass bastards, we didn't always have cars. We'd be walking to the parties and stuff like that from where we, you know, Cypress or whatever. And every now and then you would come across a couple of, you know, gangsters that were PCP'd out. And these dudes, I mean, like if you got into some shit with them, you were dealing with someone who didn't know their strength and their abilities at that point.
Yeah, they would break handcuffs.
They would break handcuffs. We seen, like, so.
Is that real? Did people really break handcuffs on PCP, or is that one of those myths? Well, I had always heard that
they
people
could definitely break windows like nothing.
They do wild shit.
They do wild shit. So there was this kid in Southgate who was a gangbanger. And a lot of other people in the area, they didn't want to fuck with him because him and his brother were kind of crazy, right? And they had like reputations. And there was another contingency of gangsters that wanted to get at him, right? So this guy was sitting on his porch one day by himself. His brothers and the rest of his guys were not there with him. He was outside of his mother's house chilling. And these dudes roll up on him with a shotgun and they blast him. They, you know, buckshotted him, you know, in his stomach, all that. And they take off. They leave him there for dead. That's what was the intention, right? And this dude was on PCP at the time. They did not know he was on PCP. Nobody knew until the paramedics came, got him. And that, oddly enough, is what saved him, is that he didn't go into shock. He was just like, whoa. You know, like, wow, so slowed down and possessed by the PCP or whatever the hell he was on. And he lived through that, you know, and it wasn't like, it was a short distance that they blasted him with all them buckshots. I mean, it had to be painful, but he didn't feel a goddamn thing apparently. And he felt it the next day, obviously, but he lived through that while he was on the PCP. Christ. And that's crazy. Cause
is it good for you?
Well, because
is that a big conspiracy, PCP?
Well, I would say that had he not been on it, he would have went into shock and sure enough died right there on that porch.
Wow.
But that's
imagine if that becomes a thing. Like it turns out to be true that if you're on PCP when you get wounded, you're more likely to survive. That would be crazy.
Yeah.
Because what is that elevated state? Isn't PCP? Isn't it related to ketamine in some way? Didn't someone say that on the podcast and it freaked us out?
Oh, like it was one chemical, like one.
Yeah, I think it's really related.
Some guys
like real close to ketamine or something.
Some guys used to smoke like they'll dip
wrong.
their joints or cigarettes in embalming
Sherm.
fluid. Yeah, Sherm.
Yeah,
that was another zombie.
Yeah, that was an apocalypse. Right, ketamine and phenylcide PCP study. Yeah, ketamine and I'm sorry. Slide. If I was a fucking scientist, I'd be so mad at this podcast.
Yeah, he was either on
Cyclidine.
Yeah, he was either on PCP or Sherm. One of the two.
It says they're both. It says are N-methyl D-aspartate receptor antagonists and dissociate anesthetics that can cause intoxication, sometimes sometimes confusion. So it seems like it's similar.
Yeah.
Is that what they're saying, Jamie?
If not,
They're both in the same family.
ketamine story begins with a drug called PCP. Yes, that PCP. So maybe it's like the proper form of it made in a lab.
So I had a boxing coach back in Boston, and he was a savage. This dude was a longshoreman. I don't want to say his name because I want to tell the whole story. But he was a wild dude, especially when he was young. And he was a really good boxer. And he got in a street fight and got his fucking finger bitten off. So his index finger on his right hand was missing, and he had it replaced with his fucking toe. This is how gangster this dude was. He had his toe removed, not the big toe, but the second one. And the toe was his new finger, and he had it curved so he could throw right hooks.
Oh, man.
So, like, when you shook his hand, you always got, like, a curved finger, because this finger was immobile. It could just kind of clamp down, but he could still throw punches. Like, he had it curved so he can make a fist.
Yeah.
They're like, we could leave it open, and he can. He's like, no, fuck that. I want to be able to crack people. So his toe is his right finger, and he goes, I don't even remember what happened. He was on PCP, and he got his finger bitten off in a street fight.
Yeah, man.
And I'm like, what is PCP like? He's like,
to the moon. It ain't nothing like we experience with this weed.
I'm not fucking even thinking about trying that, whatever that is.
I don't want it.
But if ketamine's like next door neighbors to that, that's what's crazy, because like I know a lot of people did ketamine and they did sensory deprivation tanks on ketamine. Huh. That was what John Lilly used to do, apparently.
And what'd that do for him?
I don't know, man. The way I've heard about ketamine is, it's only a bunch of different descriptions, but they feel people say like they can do IV assisted ketamine for depression, and Neil Brennan did it. You know, Neil Brennan, the comedian. Neil, who's a hilarious and interesting dude, so he's the perfect guy to like. He can describe this, and he's trying to figure out what's wrong with him. Why is he depressed? So he tries this ketamine therapy. He's like, oh, it'll probably be something where you lay there and you get a little dose of this and you relax or something.
Yeah.
He's like, no. He goes, I was tripping my fucking balls off. I go, really? And I forget his description of it, but I remember Terrence McKenna's. He said it's like you're in an alien office building, but there's no one in the office building. Like you're like wandering around. But I've heard a bunch of different, weirder, even more strange descriptions of people that go into K-holes.